Right, so I'm Amir Hussain. I'm CEO of a company based in the US called VDI Works, which is in the virtualization space. And Jehan Ara, thank you very much for taking the time to speak with me today, and I'm happy to share whatever it is that you want me to share with your audience.
Okay, first let's find out a little bit more about VDI Works. What is it? What space is it in? What is it you're trying to achieve?
Sure. So VDI Works is actually a new startup. We just started out about a year and a half ago. And it's a spin-off from a company called ClearCube Technology,
right,
which has been one of the lead innovators on the PC blade and centralized computing side.
Right.
VDI Works itself is focused on desktop virtualization technology. And that is this notion of leveraging hypervisors and virtualization technology to run desktops.
Okay.
Now, traditionally, hypervisors have been adopted widely on the server side. And whether you want to run a web server or a database server, consolidating all of that on a single physical box is what a hypervisor allows you to do.
Right.
Desktop virtualization is similar in the sense that it allows you to consolidate a large number of desktops onto a single server machine and then connect to that machine with a number of thin clients.
Right.
So the desktop evolves into this network-centric paradigm, and you get a lot of advantages, whether it is related to security, where now the data isn't actually living at the edge, not on the desktop per se, it's now in the data center.
Right.
Availability, for instance, the physical PC, if that dies, you have to have somebody bring in a crash cart, replace the PC, take that away. With the virtual desktop paradigm, you simply point your thin client to a different virtual machine and you're in business again.
Right.
So there's all sorts of total cost of ownership, management, availability, fault tolerance,
energy.
Absolutely. Energy savings is massive. In fact, these days in particular, green IT, green computing is huge. And both ClearCube and VDI Works are focused very heavily on ensuring that your wattage consumption per user diminishes to a fraction of what that number is for a traditional PC. So in all of those areas, and VDI generally is very, very exciting as a space.
Right.
And I think next year and the year after that, you'll see some mass adoption happening in some of the largest companies in the world.
Okay.
So it's a terribly exciting space
and
to be a part of.
Is it happening in the less developed part of the world as well?
That's a great question. For different reasons, yes. For instance, there was a very large deployment of a Linux-based VDI solution that took place in Brazil, several 100,000 seats, mostly focused on education.
Okay.
And with VDI, one of the things that you also get to do is, especially if you're using, say, an open source platform like Linux, where the software license costs are sort of eliminated from the equation, you get the ability to amortize the cost of a large number of desktops on the back of a single server.
Right.
So you've got, say, 40, 50 people running on a server, each within their own totally customizable, totally compartmentalized, secure virtual machines. So from their end user perspective, they don't really see a difference between a desktop and the virtual machine. But yet, from an IT perspective and a cost management perspective, you get to amortize a single server across a larger number of people and really drive down the cost of that desktop.
Right. Now, one of the things that's beginning to concern a few people is that, okay, for Linux-based machines, this is a great idea that we can go and we can have virtualization and have less desktops and work through one sort of server-based machine. But shouldn't the people who produce and develop software be also looking at providing licenses at a more affordable cost for people who are adopting virtualization?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so there's a couple of things that I'll say to that. So first of all, some of that is happening.
Okay.
So Microsoft is a partner. We work very closely with Microsoft, and over time they've been evolving their licensing approach. Over the last few years, if you've looked at, say, the Windows Starter Edition, which was focused specifically on Asia and really cut down the cost of an XP license to a small fraction of what it was in the US. Also, there are licensing schemes for blade-based computing or centralized computing. So certainly those things are happening at one level, and certain players are doing their part to ensure that cost doesn't go out of hand. And at the same time, there's an underlying industry trend as well. And that trend is that hardware costs are diminishing, and people are starting to look at least the enablement software, things like the OS, for instance, as sort of a percentage of the hardware cost.
Okay.
Because for most people, it doesn't make sense to buy a netbook for a couple $100 and then spend a couple $100 on an operating system.
Exactly.
It just doesn't make sense. And I think most hardware manufacturers would not be accepting of that sort of ratio. So again, Microsoft is looking at several ways in which they can tie, especially on the cheaper hardware platforms, you can tie the cost of the OS to a fraction of the price of the hardware, which, as that formula evolves, I think is the right way for the industry to head in.
Okay, terrific. Now, in Pakistan, because we're focusing a lot of what's happening in Pakistan, you've been very positive and optimistic about the growth of the industry here and the kind of things that are happening. But there are areas where we should be working in which we're not. There are a lot of young people in this country who need some sort of guidance, who also need to be unlearning some of the things that they've learned and learning some things that nobody's sort of even pointed out to them. So, you've talked a lot about what we can do in these areas. Can you sort of harp on that a little bit?
Absolutely, absolutely. It's something incredibly near and dear to my heart, by the way.
Right.
I think that ultimately technology and an entrepreneurial bent of thought is a transformative instrument for society, and it's nothing less than that. The issue that we have, I think, in Pakistan today is not that we don't have talented people.
Not at all.
I think we have some of the most brilliant minds, across the planet. However, what I think needs to be adjusted is, and actually a radical adjustment in this area, is really attitudes. Attitudes towards not just technology, but attitudes towards your place in society, what you can achieve, what barriers you can push, what you are capable of doing, all of those things. And that's a really very fundamental set of things that I think we need to work on very carefully to make sure that our own minds don't become the instrument that arrests us or prevents us from progress. Because ultimately that's what it boils down to in most situations. So to give you an example, for instance, I think one of the things that Pakistan needs a lot more of is that entrepreneurial bent of mind. It's fundamentally being willing to take risks, but doing so in an educated way. Not risks of the sort of jumping off a ledge, which, by the way,
can also teach you a few things.
It can, certainly. And having been someone who jumped off a ledge at the age of 5, for what purpose, that I'll tell you sort of later.
Okay.
But I think that there are many things that one can learn by taking those risks, and in an intelligent way, sort of narrowing down the set of risks that you're willing to take. And that's where your education comes in, that's where your mental prowess comes in, to be able to limit it to a set. But once you've limited to a reasonable set, swinging it so that it goes out of the park is not a bad strategy. And I think that's what we sort of need to learn and what we need to adopt. The traditionalism that we have in our society can be good, but it can also be very limiting. And increasingly I'm finding that when it comes to business, when it comes to entrepreneurialism, when it comes to risks with technology, with respect to respect to innovation, those are things that really require you to dispel the traditionalism and discard that from your life and chart your own course and do things in which you might fail, but if you succeed, people will remember you for a long, long, long time.
Well, I was on the flight to Lahore this morning. I was sitting next to a gentleman who is now in his 40s, and he was telling me that he was very, very weak in academics, and his father always wanted him to become an engineer. And he said, my mind is not towards engineering. I don't want to do this. But he got whipped into going to school and studying engineering. And finally, in his intermediate year, he dropped out of school because he just said, I can't do it. I don't understand this. I am more a business person. I'm more a marketeer. And that's what I want to pursue. And so he went against what his father wanted. He convinced him that, look, this is not going to work, I'm never going to make money in this, nor am I going to be happy. And eventually he became a commerce graduate and did his masters, and now he's doing very well. But he said, it took a lot of guts for me to even approach my father and say, I am not going to study engineering because that is not what I want to do. So do you think that culture, that barrier exists because we feel that we cannot disagree with those who are older than us or those that know better? I mean, do they actually know better about everything, or do they know better about a few things?
Well, I mean, obviously they know better about a few things,
right.
And typically that set of things is quite limited. And I think one of the hallmarks of intellectual maturity is being able to look at near and dear ones, people that you respect, people that society expects you to respect, and be able to discern what qualities you should look at them to sort of emulate or to learn from, or what areas of expertise or what areas of achievement they have demonstrated through their lives that you should look at them for, versus when to turn to somebody else.
Right.
And no one person has all the answers to everything.
Exactly. Right.
So this notion of ask him because he is wise and old, and wise and old seem to go together, right? Which is one of the aspects of traditionalism. And you can look at that and say, well, why? I mean, I'm talking about engineering here. So is this person that's giving me advice on engineering somebody who's been a great mentor to engineers and who has in him the ability at an innate level to look at somebody at a young age and to be able to identify the talent, the innate talent, and to say, okay, this guy is going to be a phenomenal engineer,
right.
And he has a pretty good success rate at it? Or does he know nothing about engineering? He's never been a mentor to anybody who's been an engineer, but he is going on with this engineering mantra because that's all he knows. That's what he's heard, engineer, doctor, pilot, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And if that's the case, then you don't need to be rude,
no.
And you don't need to sort of, bulldoze people. But at the same time, you really should be careful about where you get your advice from. I was sharing with you earlier that this book that I got turned on to recently, which is the Meditations of Marcus Aurelius, ancient book. But if you look at the first chapter, it's a collection of literally like 100 names. This philosopher taught me this, that person taught me this, my mother taught me charity, my father taught me. And at the end of that, you're sort of wondering about how interesting of a man this is that is able to distill mannerisms and character traits and the positive aspects of such a wide collection of people. And ultimately that is really what the test is. How do you get value from your surroundings, from your environment? People are a huge part of that, obviously, of that environment. And to be able to look at people and at a dispassionate level, to be able to understand what their contributions have been, where they have something of value to share with you, where you should look at them for learning, and other areas where you're better off looking at somebody else. And again, coming back to that, no one person is the combination of everything perfect. I mean, that really is the definition of God. So we shouldn't look at that, in terms of human beings. I think that we really need to expand the scope of our learning and look at people that we like and dislike, because everybody has something to teach you.
And respect people who are older than us and appreciate what they have to contribute without actually saying yes to everything that they ask of us.
Well, absolutely. I mean, you can respectfully disagree.
Right.
And at the same time, I have to tell you that I think part of this stems from the fact that there is an intellectual weakness, specifically in the area of being able to discern what is right, what is wrong, what you should believe in, what you shouldn't. And obviously, that set of metrics is unique for every individual. But not being able to discern and simply blindly following because of some social norm is about the worst thing you can do to yourself.
Right.
Because you might be led into an open manhole And I use that as in a euphemistic sense,
sure.
But I mean that happens. There's lot. If you look around us, there are lots of people who might be remarkable orators, who might have a couple of things that sound compelling, and to an intellectually weak mind that has never been trained how to discern, that becomes an opium. And as they say, the opiate of the masses, it starts to take you into directions that you really, in a sane frame of mind, don't want to go. So it's not just about personal success.
Right.
It's also about being able to create a successful society for which you need this quality of discernment. Right. I don't believe that quality is taught, much less in our schools, but not even in our families, not even within our social structures. And I think that without that, it becomes very, very difficult to present people with a large number of choices, which is what the modern world does, and expect them to choose, a subset which are sort of the right ones.
Right.
There's no absolute right, but I mean, generally, they're directionally at least correct. I think that's one of the huge things that we lack, and we really need to work on that as a society.
What can we do? Do you think there are certain things that we can begin doing right now that will change that?
I'm sure there's a lot of people who've listened to sort of the last 5 or 7 minutes, and like, Marcus Aurelius, this, that, nonsense, whatever. How does that, sort of affect my life? And I sort of agree with that. I mean, at a certain level, you should think about all these things that we're talking about and come to your own conclusions. But ultimately, it all boils down to practice. Right. What are we going to do to change this? Right?
Yes.
So, in a very practical sort of approach to things, I think entrepreneurship, in of itself, has the seeds for a lot of these qualities that we're talking about. You can't be a successful entrepreneur without being able to clearly discern between good choices and bad choices.
Right.
That's a generic skill set that you can apply to your life, not only within the realm of business, but even otherwise. And there are a lot of tools that this process of sort of becoming an entrepreneur and becoming an even better entrepreneur and improving that capability of yours over time, there's a lot of skill sets that you pick up. Entrepreneurship also happens to be one of the things that has been absent from the Pakistani scene for a long time. We have big businesses which are essentially rich families that have had conglomerates over a period of time, and those conglomerates have now grown beyond, and maybe there's been some subdivisions within the family, but none of those guys, other than the original guy 4 generations ago, actually had to act like an entrepreneur.
Right.
Very few people did.
Right.
Now recently, with technology becoming part of the mainstream in our society over the last decade, 2 decades, we've started seeing some companies where people are starting from scratch and are trying to build things on their own. I would say that that's happening in a microcosm now, right. And that really needs to happen across the board, across all areas. And when you do that, you realize that in certain areas, for instance, we complain about government policy this, government policy that, I want this from the government. At the end of the day, I think a good situation would be where you just don't have to care about the government at all. I mean, just get the hell out of the way and let me do what I want to do. That's all I want from the government.
Right.
And I think that's the attitude that we need to impart to people as well, which is that there is really no excuse. I mean, other than somebody physically coming you, grabbing your hands and saying, you cannot type code on that keyboard.
Right.
I mean, short of that, who cares? Who cares what they think or what policies they have? And that's really what the world has become now. And that sense of empowerment, I don't think is fully appreciated by people in our society.
People I think they've psyched themselves into thinking that we cannot do this because we're prevented from doing it. So they're limiting the way they think.
Absolutely.
Or what they can achieve.
Absolutely. And there's no limit to what you can achieve, especially with the tools that are now available to you. In the practical sense, so what do we need to do? We don't have startup incubators.
Right.
We don't have real honest-to-goodness entrepreneurship programs. And entrepreneurship, again, in the honest-to-goodness garage startup, starting with nothing kind of a way. Not entrepreneurship in the sense of starting a new product line in an established company that really doesn't have to fight a fight.
Right.
I mean, that's that's boring.
That's not entrepreneurship.
So at the end of the day, I think those are the things that we need to do. And there's certain people, there's Pakistanis that are incredibly successful all over the world, within this country, outside this country. As you saw this year, we have the first Pakistani now listed on the Forbes rich list, and hopefully that number is going to continue to grow. But at the end of the day, we need people like that, looking at the area of influence that they have around themselves, and based on who you are, that area, the radius of that area will change and will grow and shrink. But you can certainly influence people within that sphere. And doing that and doing practical things like participating in incubators, like going out and working with people to really impart some of the fundamental traits of entrepreneurship, those are some of the things that I think need to be done. Because ultimately what we're talking about is no less than sort of a social level DNA reprogramming of where we are now and where we need to be. There's a big gap there. And we need to reprogram ourselves to shed this notion of, risk is bad. Now, it's important to understand that, these notions have taken hold not because we're like stupid, but because things have been different in the past.
Right.
For instance, if you were an entrepreneur, say in the early 80s, it was very difficult to establish a new factory.
Right.
It was very difficult to get all the permits for that factory, to get foreign exchange, to import machinery, set it up. You required like 50,000 different permits from God knows how many government departments, right?
Right.
And by the way, if you failed, the laws around debt collection in the country were very severe.
Right.
I mean, there was no notion of declaring personal bankruptcy and being done with it and moving on, or saying, look, I have a limited liability company, so the extent of my liability is the extent of my ownership, and I have limited liability. The bank would come and sell your house to recover a loan which had nothing to do with your house, just because you were a director of that company. So yeah, in that environment, risk is bad. But you know what? That was 25 years ago. Things have changed over the last 20 years, and I don't think we've internalized that as a society and have taken pains to impart that to the next generation. They don't need to have the sorts of things and the ideas holding them back that the previous generation did. And I think in shedding that and dispelling those risk-averse frames of mind on a collective level, that really is the next way forward for us. Without that, there's no moving forward.
Okay. Now, so you think incubators are definitely one thing that's needed, and people who are willing to share their ideas and actually train and reprogram young people. Now, in addition to this, now technology we've been focusing more on software technology.
Yeah.
There really hasn't been anything that's been done in the area of hardware development in this country. Do you think that there is any scope for that in this country, and what needs to be done to make that happen? You yourself had been working in the area of developing a handheld and various things. Where did that go? Share with us what it took for you to develop that, where that project's at, and what we need to do to allow young people to work in the area of hardware development as well.
Absolutely. Actually, there is quite a lot of progress on the hardware side over the last few years.
Okay.
And if you look at, there's a number of companies that I don't want to name, but there's a large number of companies now that are doing hardware work in Pakistan.
Other than assembling?
Other than assembling.
Okay.
So design and
okay, great.
sort of from the ground up.
Okay.
The problem is, actually there's two or three things.
Okay.
One, there's sort of this macro challenge with hardware, which applies across the board, across the globe. That hardware has become such a commodity business that margins in that world, consumer electronics or even enterprise computing, are relatively thin and like real thin, like single digit thin. So in order to build and sustain a company with that sort of an economic dynamic, you really require massive volume. And ultimately, it's the guy that has the volume that's able to put together a price point that then, sort of feeds that.
Sure.
If you have no volume, unless you invented something completely new and different and very differentiated, in which case you probably have 6 months before it gets copied and somebody starts selling it in high volume. But at least you've got those 6 months.
Yeah.
For everything else, I mean, it's impossible to really drive volumes as a small startup. So startups in general should focus on those aspects of physical appliances, devices, hardware, etc. that are either niche, and fundamentally they're targeting such a specific part of the market that none of the volume producers would be interested in that to begin with. Right? So you can create some leverage there. That's one approach you can take. The other approach you can take is ride on the back of somebody else. Have a product that somebody else is building and tweak that in an inexpensive way, but be able to leverage somebody else's volume. And there's certain specific areas in which you could do that, but that doesn't generically apply across the board. The problems as far as hardware garage startups, like if you were really starting from scratch in Pakistan, have to do with the fact that all the companies that are doing hardware work here and all of the associated industry around that. So it's sort of, it's the design, it's then the fabrication, in which there's all sorts of things like who's building the boards and what number of layers can you put in a board, and there's a lot of capital expense associated with machines that do that. Then there's advanced pick and place type equipment, which is the actual assembly. And then there's the industrial design, which is the physical, the mechanical aspects of the chassis, the housing, all of those things. There's the packaging, there's the regulatories that you have to go through. There's a lot of things end to end.
A lot of quality standards that you have to meet.
Exactly. And even sort of upfront, there's a lot of supply chain type issues. So then the question is to run an efficient supply chain, where are your components coming from in the local area? Do you have people building those components? Like in China, one of the ways that they've done this vertical integration really well is that within say a 15, 20, 30, 50 mile radius, they pretty much have everything required to do a full soup to nuts hardware product. And you never have to leave that, and that creates cost advantages. So in order to do that as a garage startup in Pakistan, you obviously have to have that industry pre-existing in the country to be able to leverage that. And while it exists only for large companies, because large companies own and solely control that infrastructure. So the production infrastructure is not open and available to everybody. Telephone Industries of Pakistan, they have a great manufacturing facility. They obviously do a lot of injection molding around the actual housing and this and that. And if they wanted to, they could create a lot of things in addition to phones and PABX equipment, but they don't. And their infrastructure is not available to anybody else to leverage. So there's no notion really of a contract manufacturer as such over here. What there is design houses that work exclusively for large companies, or the example of the TIP, which specifically does just telephones for a particular company, and there's many examples like that. Now, having said that, again, unless you have an absolutely spectacular killer idea that's in a niche, that's highly differentiated and allows you to charge fat margins, now is really not the time to be looking at a consumer electronics product or something like that. I just think doing a startup is hard enough anyway, and within this realm, dealing with thin margins and all of the physical aspects of inventories and all of the other business problems, it's just a challenging thing to deal with.
Okay, now, so coming back to what is being done here, there's a lot of innovation that is happening. And there are a lot of young people who are starting companies in the IT space and developing especially for the mobile sector, because now everything is being delivered on mobile. So what do you think, if there's a young person who wants to start a company, what are the areas that they should be looking at? What is going to be the next big thing, so to speak? Rather than everybody developing for the iPhone and the BlackBerry and all that, yes, certainly if you have a great idea for an application for any of these platforms, that's great. But is there something else, a kid who is going to be coming out of university, say 2 years down the road or 3 years down the road, is there something that they should be researching or looking at right now that will help them then? Rather than thinking of, okay, this is the technology that people are working on now, and this is what I'm going to do 4 years from now, the landscape will have changed, right? So do you have, I mean, you've been looking at innovation and doing a lot of great things. Do you have any ideas that perhaps these kids can learn from?
Well, yeah, absolutely. I'll run you through a number of different spaces.
Okay.
And by the way, I'm going to do this real quick because I want people to sort of start looking at all of these diverse spaces. Many of them are connected and many of them aren't. But if people want to connect to find out more about a particular space or why I think this is going to be a hot space, I mean, you can feel free to share my contact info with your audience, and I'd be happy to do that offline. But there's a lot of very interesting areas.
Right.
So first of all, when you're answering a question like this, you need to look at certain fundamentals.
Okay.
Fundamentals around trends in the industry.
Right.
One of the fundamental trends in the industry is how CPUs are evolving, right? CPUs are going from, so we're off this clock speed battle, right? And clock speeds are sort of level now.
Right.
And we're into this multi-core world,
Right.
where you're going to have increasing numbers of basically the same CPU reproduced on the same piece of silicon.
Right.
So you're going to have essentially a parallel computer on a chip. And when you do that, you actually create a fundamental shift in the way software needs to function if it wants to use that hardware efficiently, and also from a business perspective, what that means for IT buyers. This is one of the reasons virtualization is going to continue to be very hot.
Right.
Which is that today we don't really have a consumer software application that's mainstream that can truly leverage the power of, say, 128 cores on a chip.
Right.
In 3 or 4 years, we're going to be at roughly 32 plus cores on a single chip. And it's going to double in every 18 months or so, Moore's law, all of that. So very quickly, in 5 to 7 years, you'll be looking at over 100 cores on a chip. And to be able to leverage that, unless you invent something completely new on a mass or a massively used consumer application and a business application, you're not going to be able to get the power from those cores. I mean, Microsoft Word will work at exactly the same speed that it works today on 100 cores, because there are very few inherently parallelizable tasks in Microsoft Word. So virtualization is one mechanism that allows you to recover the investment in these massively multi-core chips by not having an application that can use all those cores, but by at least allowing you to compartmentalize hundreds of applications that hundreds of users are running and leverage that CPU at the same time.
Right.
So this is sort of going to be a de facto. This is going to happen. Virtualization is important because it's really required in order to get value out of future CPUs.
Right.
Now it can do a lot of things, and that is a whole discussion in its own right. Storage virtualization, server virtualization, desktop virtualization. What are the trends? But this is certainly one area that people should look at, right? The other area, which I think is very incredibly interesting, is that again, if you look at the fundamental trends, cost per pixel in almost every kind of display technology is becoming very, very inexpensive. You look at these flat panels that have basically come down to 25% of their price.
Right.
Even in Pakistan, I recently checked, in the last 18 to 24 months maybe. So what this means is that there'll be a proliferation of displays. And this notion of a single display with a single computer is no longer really going to hold. I also believe that with some other trends in, say, wireless networking and things of that nature, and also mobile technology, there's going to be this notion of this ethereal amorphous computer that as you walk into an environment, it mates itself with other peripherals in the environment over a wireless bus, and becomes a device that's customized for a particular purpose for a limited period of time.
Right.
So as you walk into a conference room, your phone mates with a projector or with a large screen flat panel display over a wireless bus. It understands everything. You run your presentation. If there is a keyboard or an input device, it mates with your phone. Your phone also has the ability to connect up to a virtual desktop across the cloud because it has both, say, WiMAX, as well as the ability to run a full screen application because it understands displays. Those are the kinds of things that I think will start to happen. Display technology is a huge part of this. Okay. So when you have these inexpensive displays, do you present information in the same way that you do now? Or do you come up with fundamentally new ways of presenting information, of navigating repositories of data? and what other richness can you add on top of how things are done now. So I think visualization is a huge area. It's a huge area, and there's going to be a lot of innovation that happens. There's going to be a lot of fusion of things like augmented reality,
Right.
Which is a kind of a segue where now you're dealing with image processing. So you have a cell phone and you're looking at reality, right, a street corner, and the cell phone is able to do character recognition and object recognition, and it understands that you're standing at a cross street that has a certain name. It'll pick that up, it'll understand that it was written on a street sign, and it'll go fetch information about that cross street. Depending on what you're interested in restaurants right now, or you're interested in finding a place to buy a laptop or whatever it is, that information starts to get overlaid on a real-time view of reality. And that's the notion of augmented reality. So within this, there are things like object recognition. There are things like again computer vision, which is an old field, and then also this notion of mashups, which comes to us from the Web 2.0 kind of metaphor.
Right.
The ability to link information from diverse sources and functionality from diverse sources and overlay it, and in this case in real time, to solve a problem that you face in the moment. So augmented reality is another area which I think is going to be tremendous. Then of course robotics, and every time somebody mentions robotics, you sort of think, yeah, everybody's talked about it for decades. Well, it's happened. It's not that it's going to happen, it's happened. If you look at companies like iRobot in the US, that produce this little vacuum cleaner called Roomba, they've sold several million of it. I mean, last I checked, it sold, I think, close to 5 million of these Roomba robots. And they're autonomous. So not to be confused with, the BattleBots on BBC, where you're actually just controlling these things via remote control. These are autonomous, independent vehicles. And that technology, those fundamental algorithms, the problems that you have to solve in creating those independent vehicles, those are the same set of problems that you require to build a UAV.
Right.
Those are the same set of problems you have to solve to do a vacuum cleaner. And now, again, companies like Microsoft and iRobot, a large number of other companies, and even some completely open source DIY type groups have opened up their SDKs, their toolkits, and a lot of the common algorithms and techniques that you need to develop basic capabilities in a robot, those are now available to you.
Right.
Microsoft has a really nice robotics developer toolkit and a set of free tools that you can use. And if you look at, say, MakeZine, which is one of my favorite magazines, it's MakeZine by O'Reilly Group. You go look at that and you'll find Arduino and a number of other open source microcontroller technologies that have a large number of modules you can add. You can build your own robotic devices and prototypes. And again, that hardware versus software. Obviously, when you're talking about robots, hardware is important.
Right.
But what's even more important is the software. So you can really focus in on that software and test that software out on basic robotic, basic in the mechanical sense, basic robotic creations, and then be able to work with somebody, to be able to partner with somebody to take those algorithms, those techniques, those capabilities in software and put them on a platform that maybe somebody else has built that is far more capable.
Right.
So, I mean, in a nutshell, there's a number of other areas I'm excited about, but there's
but
more
these are mind-blowing already. Now, considering where the world is going in terms of technology, what do you think needs to be done to change things at our universities? Are they teaching what kids will need, what will empower kids to do the kind of things that you're suggesting? Or is there something that they can add on to? Several universities are now talking to us and saying, okay, if you think that this curriculum is not good enough to create the kind of individuals that you need, what additionally can they put into the curriculum that will make these young people ready to tackle the space that they're going to get into?
Yeah, so I'll go back and tie this discussion with two of the things that we talked about previously.
Right.
One is that quality of discernment at an objective level.
Definitely.
To be able to look at what value you can get from which quarter.
Right.
So, if I ask you the question, does the name of any Pakistani professor come to mind that has established a really innovative, brilliant, successful company? Does anything come to mind?
Well, other than Dr. Umar Saif, nobody really.
Umar is doing a fabulous job.
Yeah.
And he's very recently again,
Yes,
because he's a young man,
Right.
his is a recent phenomena.
Right.
But if you think back 20 years,
No,
right?
I can't think of anyone.
So if these are not the kind of people who had the DNA in them to go and do the entrepreneurial kinds of things, first of all, I think that just needs to be accepted.
Right.
You're not going to be able to go and take an entrepreneurial approach or disseminate an entrepreneurial curriculum through people that fundamentally are not entrepreneurial, right?
Right.
So that's one thing. And so how do we fix that? Because people are ultimately the most important part of the equation, which is why I'm starting off with that.
Right.
You fix that by injecting people that do have that quality. I mean, there might be entrepreneurs that are not great professors, but that certainly have the ability to motivate people,
Right.
that have the ability to give people direction, and maybe in concert with the infrastructure that exists at those universities, that pairing can work.
Right.
Should that pairing happen in the context of an incubator? Should that pairing happen in the sense that Stanford does it? Obviously we've got to be realistic about things. Stanford is able to do tremendous things because they already have far more than a foot in the door. The whole door is wide gaping open. They've got multiple entrepreneurs that have built multi-billion-dollar companies that now work with the university.
Right.
So we've got to start with a situation that you get a few entrepreneurs working with the university, you pick some students, and the only way to do this is to do this. The only way to do this is to start a company. It's not to talk about it. It's not to change the curriculum. It's not to get a new book from somewhere. The only way you do a startup is by doing a startup. And that has to happen. That action has to happen.
Okay.
There's some small ingredients. The biggest thing is really the people. But there's some small ingredients. Things like a little bit of money.
Right.
And it's just a little bit of money. It's not a big deal. You don't need millions of dollars to do a software startup in any of these areas that I've talked about. Because even if you do sort of a visualization startup and you want a really fancy setup with a room with a 3D projected capability on all four, we're talking double-digit $1,000,
Okay.
which for our universities is nothing. Given what the budgets are now, it's nothing.
Right.
So it's really the intent, the pairing up with the people, and the doing of it. And the doing of it again can happen if somebody were to take individual sort of interest and say, look, I'm going to be an angel investor and I'm going to go do this with these guys. What I'm assuming there is that the populace is willing, right? That the students are willing to go down this path, because this is a difficult path. This is almost always a hard journey. And you can look up all the stats around how many companies succeed and how many fail. The point is that basically almost all startups fail. It's just the 1 or 2% that end up succeeding. But it's still a worthwhile endeavor.
And it's a journey you learn from.
Absolutely. Because the chances of so your probabilities improve, right? Over time, you do many of them, you can do the probability calculation, it improves.
Right.
With every successive try, your chances of success double basically. At least for most people, because they learn a lot. And people that refuse to learn then stop doing startups, I think. It's not enjoyable after a certain point in time once you've been battered.
Right.
So I think that just has to happen. And in order to do successful startups, the people that are doing the startup, which includes the students obviously, because fundamentally this is their thing. You're just providing a little bit of guidance, but ultimately it's their thing. They really need to be open to, mental reprogramming, and they need to be able to see that the only way they get ahead in a meaningful way is by, just going ahead and doing this. And the chances of failure might be high, but the consequences of that failure are not that high. The largest consequence is essentially a mental consequence, which is that, oh my God, what will people think? I failed. You know what? Who cares? If you're worried about what people think, startups are not for you. But if you're to the point mentally where you understand and appreciate the significant chances of failure, and you have grappled with them in your mind, and you've dealt with them, wrestled with them, and sort of put them on the back burner now, not allowing yourself to be constantly tormented by those, then you're doing fine. Even if you fail, you'll at least have a clear head as you go through that failure, and you learn a lot. That's something that's a quality that's hard to reduce to a syllabus or to a set of lectures, and that's something I think that folks in universities, students in particular, need to be open to.
Okay. Now, many kids who come out of university say that, look, we don't have the business sense to start a startup because we are basically techies.
Yeah.
So what's the solution to that?
Well, I think that's a disingenuous sort of an issue to bring up, because when kids say that, what do they mean by that? I mean, they know basic math.
Right.
All you need to run a business is to know that you should build something for less and sell it for more, and because you want to sell it, you should build something that people want.
Right.
Those are the only two things you need to know, and that's about how simple it is. Now, beyond that, once you get successful, then there are other complications.
When you formalize it into a company.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of venture capitalists or a lot of investors, angel investors, that look at an idea that has been reduced to practice, is now running, and has 50,000, 100,000 people using it, and the guy comes to you in a very modest way and says, look, I worked really hard. I came up with this idea, I reduced it to practice, it's doing well. I'm making a little bit of money because I had the common sense to sell for more than what I built it for. But I really want to take this to the next level now, and I'd like to scale it. And I need your help for that because I'm not a business genius, I'm 19 years old. And at that point, you will find people, doling out help. Because that's exactly what everybody's looking for. They're looking for a business where you've got something that people want, you've got something that people are willing to spend money to buy, you've got the talent to take that idea and make it something that has proven itself out at some reasonable level of scale.
Right.
And now what's left is the sales and the marketing and the channels and the
basic commercializing.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's a lot of talent out there that can help you do that, and that's maybe one of the points in the evolution of a company where you should maybe seriously consider venture capital if your idea is really growing at a very rapid scale and it's beyond organic, and you want money to scale. I mean, every VC wants to hear that.
But venture capital is not really available in Pakistan, right? So what do these kids do once they get to that stage? Is it something that the industry should be looking at? Is it something the government should be looking at? Where does this money or these people come from?
Yeah.
Who recognize the talent and recognize that this product or innovation that this kid has come up with is going to amount to something big.
Yeah, there's a limited number of venture capital companies. There are Pakistani venture capital companies.
Right.
There's a company out of Karachi which has done a few. There was the PTC fund that was supposed to be a VC.
That's an R&D fund. Yeah.
R&D fund, which I'm not so sure where that ended up. But there's been a few initiatives like that. However, for an idea that has global relevance, that those 100,000 users that I was talking about don't necessarily have to be in Pakistan. In fact, most likely they're not in Pakistan, because the internet is so open that and now people have problems that are so common that if you've solved one person's problem in Botswana, you've probably solved a similar problem for somebody in Iceland,
right,
and in New York and in Karachi. So that allows you to create these things which have global relevance. And once you have global relevance, I mean, the fact that there's a few venture capital companies in Pakistan shouldn't stop you. There are examples of many Pakistani software companies that have raised capital from Bay Area venture companies and so on and so forth.
And even Dubai.
And Dubai, I mean, there's been a couple of big ones recently.
Right.
I know Umar has achieved some level of success doing that. So that's, I mean, those things are once you build something that somebody wants, by definition, They want it, and so therefore they're willing to go through the mechanics of trying to figure out what they need to give you to get it. And that's the transaction that you have to sort of think about. That transaction can happen within the country, it can happen outside of the country. It can happen in the region, in Dubai as you pointed out, or it can happen internationally. And there have been many examples of all of these different permutations and combinations. So it's not even like I'm talking about a theoretical possibility.
Right.
I mean, a lot of people have done it.
Right. Now, considering that Pakistan is a country where a large number of our people live in the rural areas, what can technology do, or what should we be thinking of developing, what kind of things should we be thinking of creating that will help them grow and help them live better lives? Because I know you were working in the area of ICT for development, and this is something a lot of kids want to do because they want to feel that they're being, what they're creating is of relevance to all of Pakistan rather than just the urban part of Pakistan. So, any ideas?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is one area where I'll sort of zoom out and not just look at ICT, but look at sort of technology in general.
Sure.
So one of the areas that I didn't talk about previously, because it's not really purely ICT, it has a mechanical engineering aspect to it. But Neil Gershenfeld, who's a professor out of MIT, has this, he's written a book called Fab, which is a wonderful book. And he talks about these fab labs, or these fabrication labs. And the basic premise is that technology, fabrication technology, has gotten so inexpensive that you can build a fab lab and place it anywhere in the world for, say, $100,000, and now even less, because I'm giving you numbers that are a few years old, but maybe $30,000 now. And you can design stuff anywhere on the planet, and you can literally, print it out in 3D in the fab lab. So there's things like laser cutters, which are computer controlled, CNC machines. There's things like layered plastic type devices that allow you to create objects made of plastic. Very similar to inkjet technology, except they layer actual plastic. And so all of those things are now available. One part of allowing a rural population to benefit from technology is around access. That access has to do with physical things, and it also has to do with information. When you combine the two, like for instance, the design for a straw that lets you literally take a sip from a muddy pool of water, and what comes out the other end and goes into your mouth is absolutely clean filtered water. And to be able to, and that's not expensive to build,
no.
And to be able to do that using technology like Fab Labs, etc., that you disseminate on a wide scale basis, and give maybe certain more skilled people the responsibility to run that. Well, you've got these things being produced, and we've got these things being customized as per the needs of that particular place. And if there are things that are really mass scale, you may not want to do that at the Fab Lab, but you can test out how useful a particular piece of technology is and then do it. So there's this notion of low-cost manufacturing and low-cost production. Give these facilities to people in the area that, by the way, have their own inventions that have a lot of relevance.
Right.
For instance, people still pull water out of wells using, oxen. They can generate electricity with that same ox power, if you will. It's just that they don't do it, but they can if they want to. There's solar panels. There's wind generation, which is considered to be extremely expensive, primarily because the props that go into those devices are expensive. But there's actually open source designs for those props, and you can build them on very expensive, absolutely, out of PVC tube.
Okay.
I mean, you could take a thick PVC pipe and you can run it through a computer controlled cutter, and you can get wonderful props that you can use to run an electric motor, which in reverse is basically a generator, and you've got enough electricity to power a rural home. You can do that for a few thousand rupees, because it's the cost of the PVC pipe plus the cost of the motor and some associated electronics and maybe an old battery that you've refurbished, which happens here.
Right.
So these are things that, it's just about just going out and doing them. It's not like they're hard to do. You can provide clean water to your people. You can provide electricity to people. If you think about it at a micro scale, you can certainly do that. And combine that with information, access to information, and now you've really created a two-way dialogue between the more developed areas of the country and the rural areas of the country. And I think from that, there's no looking back. Once you expose people to things, there's 100 million cell phone users now in Pakistan.
Exactly.
And this happened over the last 15 years. I mean, it's happened really, really quickly. So once you've exposed people to cell phones, they're coming up with all sorts of novel ways of using them. They're using them as means to, taxi driver is using them as a means to get business and to stay in touch with, their customers. And they're actually making money off of these tools and of these innovations. There's many businesses which wouldn't be possible in Pakistan, including the GPS, car tracking business, lots of security businesses, or these home DVD delivery services. Without cell phones, these businesses could not exist. So that empowering layer of enablement technology has come about and created a dozen different business models that couldn't exist previously. And similarly, in the rural context, once you provide electricity to all these people, once you provide, and they're no longer thinking about water and all of these basic things, you really created an asset out of your population, which many people look today upon as a liability, which I disagree with.
Right. Okay. Now, you were talking about the R&D fund. It does exist. There is a national ICT R&D fund which has millions of rupees in it. And they have been investing and they have been giving money to professors within university for R&D work and some to companies to actually develop ideas that they have. How do you think we can use that more effectively? Because I think they are also learning as they go along. And if there are any ideas that we can give them which will help use this money for R&D much more effectively. I think sometimes they complain that they don't get the kind of proposals that they want.
Yeah.
And I think perhaps that's because people are not broadening their vision to look at generating the kind of ideas that they should be doing.
So again, politically incorrect, but the people running that fund, have they run other venture funds successfully in the past? No. So the first thing that needs to be done is that money is in the wrong hands. Not because there's something wrong with the people,
right,
but because those people don't have the skill set.
Right.
I mean, if you expect your wicketkeeper to bowl excellent leg spin, it's not going to happen. And that's what we're asking people to do in that situation. It's a lot of money and it's the nation's money. And I think it needs to be turned over to somebody that has a demonstrated track record of success. Even if that individual is not, say, permanently located in this country, who cares? All they're doing is evaluating business proposals, meeting with those teams and providing some level of local oversight. Because ultimately, if it's more than that, then it's not really a venture fund, it's really then an incubator, and we go back to the whole incubator question.
Right.
So there are many Pakistani venture capitalists who have done amazingly well.
Right.
There's a Pakistani venture capitalist who was on the Forbes Midas list, which is the top 10 venture capitalists in the world.
Right.
And folks like that are out there. I'm sure many of them, maybe not all of them, but many of them would be willing to be leveraged for something like this.
So it needs to be professionally run by
Absolutely.
people who've done it before.
Absolutely. It's not a venture fund right now.
Right.
I mean, this notion of we're not getting the right sort of proposal, how do you know what a right sort of proposal is? And I don't mean you, I mean who complains about this.
Right.
If one asks that person, well, what is the right sort of proposal? I mean, does it look like another proposal that led you to build a $2 billion company in your past life? That sort of proposal? Or do you have absolutely no context and you're just making things up? I mean, ultimately it has to boil down to that level of practicality. And I think that somebody who hasn't built a successful company themselves, who hasn't funded a successful company themselves with their own money or with even other people's money, and have never run a venture fund in the past or even an angel, kind of a operation, to take billions of rupees and to say that, I'm not getting the right sort of proposal, I mean, I'm sorry, that has no credibility in my eyes.
True. Okay, now, we've been talking about entrepreneurs and the need for many more entrepreneurs to start businesses in this country, and especially in the technology space where it's easier to do right now. How should success of these entrepreneurs be measured? We were talking earlier about individuals that you know and individuals that I know who've made millions of dollars and how easy it was to get to that stage. But when they've developed $1 million businesses, should then they be considered successes, or should there be something else that they should be aiming for?
Well, there's two notions here. One is, how other people think of you, whether you're a success or not, and how you think of yourself.
Right.
To me, to be honest, when I started out, it was very important what other people thought of me.
Okay.
And after a certain point in time, though, when I realized that essentially the set of things that other people could do for me was becoming increasingly limited. And why, there's a complex set of reasons behind that, but ultimately, you get to a point where you're not looking for people to do you favors as such. And if you're not looking for people to do you favors, what really, what does it matter anyway? You have your own roadmap, if you will, and you're pursuing that. And people that you care about deeply, obviously their opinion means something to you.
Of course.
But in general, what the wider world thinks, whatever. The wider world can think whatever they want to think, but I think you should have the clarity of thought and also the sense of purpose that allows you to proceed on your track without let or hindrance. The other piece is what you think of yourself. Now, in entrepreneurship, I would be lying if I said money isn't important. Of course, money is important. Money is important because it is an enabler initially, up to a certain point.
Right.
A certain amount of money is important for you, and then what John D. Rockefeller used to refer to as the level of competence, which is that now you've acquired enough money to where you don't need to work, your needs are taken care of, and now you can sort of do whatever you want to do. After you've reached that level of competence, what do you choose to do? That to me is sort of the more important question. So money is important. Money is also validation because people vote with money. Ultimately, money is a way to keep score. If people like your product and you're charging something for your product, the fact that you made, say, 5,000 sales and that translated into $2.8 million, that's $2.8 million Benjamins in terms of a vote that people are giving to your product, that's important, right? That's a quality of money that has nothing to do with the money itself. That's the democratic aspect of people saying, hey, I like what you built. That is important. Also, acquiring enough money to be able to do things that you want to do, to be able to feel free, that you're not compelled to go down a certain path. That's important as well. I think that's every entrepreneur's dream to get to that point, and that's important. Beyond that, though, once you've acquired that level of competence, I think it is important, and it's the mark of a man as to what path he chooses. Does he continue to pursue money as a way to keep score, but now in a game that has far less tangible meaning? Or does he look upon money now as an enabler to do other exciting, interesting things? And when I say that, I don't mean start a non-profit. Right? If you want to, wonderful, go ahead, start a non-profit. But even as a means to empower yourself and remove whatever last vestiges of roadblocks and impediments you perceived in your way, because now you have the money, you shouldn't feel impediments, and you can now proceed beyond those to go do meaningful things, whether it's pursue an area of research or pursue an area of study or pursue a new product that you felt was a bigger risk, so you didn't want to do it earlier, but the impact on the world is going to be absolutely amazing if you get this thing to work. So now is the time to go do that because you have nothing to lose.
Right.
So that truly to me is the mark of a man as to what one does when one reaches that level of competence.
And do you think enough people do that? Or do they just stop there?
If even one person doesn't do it, the answer to the question of is it enough is,
it's not.
that one guy should do it too.
Right.
That's the way I think about it. But yeah, in general, I think few people do it. Few people do it. Of my own, in my own history, the people that sort of I've seen that have acquired wealth, maybe even early on in their careers, many of them have chosen, alternate paths, some of which are very valuable, but unconnected with what they were doing previously, which is great. And others have chosen paths which are perhaps less valuable, I'm not the judge of what's valuable or not. Ultimately, it has to be the individual. But I think most people, when polled on the subject of, this guy is doing X, is X valuable, would probably, you would get a majority vote saying, yeah, this is probably not that valuable. And a lot of people go down that path. And then there are others who completely sort of drown themselves in hedonism, which is a minority. I mean, you don't see that many successful hedonistic people, completely hedonistic, that have absolutely nothing to do with anything of value. That happens amongst the rich, but it doesn't necessarily happen amongst people who have been successful entrepreneurs and have fought the good fight and have come out the other end with some level of success.
Right.
Because to people that are rich without having worked for it, money has a completely different meaning. Things are in a totally different altered state. So hedonism is easier practiced by them. It's much more difficult for somebody that has been through the motions of that entrepreneurial process to come out the other end being a meaningless hedonistic, individual that's nothing but a burden on society.
Okay. Now, there have been people in this country who've been extremely successful, whether they're related to technology or not. But we don't see here what we've seen in countries around the world, where there are books or published pieces about their journey and what they've accomplished, so that there are people that young people can look up to as role models and learn from. Why do you think that is, and do you think we should be doing something to change that? Because we're always complaining about the image of Pakistan and how it's projected badly by everybody. Maybe there's something that we as individuals or we as an industry can do to change that. Now, especially with the power of the web and blogging and social networking, do you think there is a path that we need to take?
Absolutely. I mean, there's this group on Facebook called, I think, 6 Degrees of Separation. Right? And the whole notion is that it's an experiment that says within 6 links or 6 friend connections, you pretty much have everybody that's on Facebook.
Right.
So if you think about it that way, and you look at how many millions of people from Pakistan are on Facebook, just the power of social media, if people wanted to project a positive view, which I believe is the real view, because I think what we read in the New York Times and the Washington Post is nothing short of a load of crap. It has absolutely nothing to do with the reality of Pakistan. But now with the power of social media, if we wanted to project that image, we could. So that's a great thing. That's a fundamental empowerment that ultimately the guy next door is about as powerful as Rupert Murdoch.
Right.
And I mean, I'm exaggerating, but for all practical purposes.
Yeah.
So if you really wanted a message to be heard, the mechanisms exist for that message to be heard across the world. Should we do more of it? Absolutely. Why don't we do more of it? Probably a few reasons. One, it's just relatively new. I think we're still sort of coming to grips with all of the enablement tools, the fact that the tech industry in Pakistan is only a decade and a half, 2 decades old in earnest. So that's one aspect of it. And the third aspect is we just need to get over ourselves. I mean, we have too many chips on our shoulder. And I'm saying it bluntly because that's the problem. Ultimately, we have too many chips on our shoulder, and we need to just sort of grow up and get out of this nonsense sort of a mentality that we're in, which is essentially self-negation and running down things that we do. I'm appalled at how easily we run down meaningful things that we've achieved or we've done. And I think it's sort of become fashionable. It's a mental cancer of sorts. And that, the third component, I think, is something that we all need to work on to rid ourselves. The other thing that we should also do, frankly, is check people who promote this negativity in society. I mean, the next time somebody says to you, it's been 60 years, what have we had? List all the achievements that we have made. Check people on it, because it's crap. If people say that, everything is negative, there's no direction, it's just nonsense. And I think unless people are checked on this, and to say, well, where do you get your data from? Because I have this data, would you care to contradict that? And I think that's when you start changing habits. Now, it's going to be incredibly unpleasant because, a lot of people do this and you can't, but I mean, maybe not in as militant of a way as I'm advocating, but in your own way, I think we need to do this, because ultimately this is how habits change. Until you check negative habits, there's no incentive for that habit to change.
And people are just looking for excuses, I think.
Absolutely. And then also, I mean, it's just become a topic of conversation now. Let's all sit and let's all complain. I frankly have no time for that.
Right. Okay. Is there anything we've not covered that you would like to say, something that you feel very strongly about and that we haven't been able to cover in this interview?
Well, I feel very, very strongly about the fact that the youth of Pakistan, which I think 50% of our population is under 18 at the moment, is just a massive pool of resources that can be leveraged to transform the society in every way. What has passed and what is old is in any case without meaning, because very soon it will fade away, and very soon with the old fading away, the excuses that we associate with the old will also wither away. So the question is not what was done, but what we will do. And that's a question that every young person in Pakistan needs to look in the mirror and ask himself and herself. The tools for transformative, fundamental change now exist. Those tools need to be understood and embraced in different areas of excellence, in different spheres of life. They need to be understood and embraced, and most of all, action needs to be valued. We are a society that undervalues action, and until we alter that ratio, the magnitude of good thoughts and good intentions that exist in Pakistan will never really translate into a similar magnitude of positive change and good actions. And that's a message not only for the people of this country, but really for youth everywhere, right? I mean, there are many, many things in developed countries that could be fixed with a similar approach to things. So I think those things are extremely, incredibly important. Self-reflection, looking within yourself and asking yourself how you can improve, not why you were stopped from achieving goal A or goal B and it must be somebody else's fault and let's figure out which government minister is to blame. Stop doing that.
Right.
Let's say it was done to you.
It's a waste of energy.
It's a waste of energy. What are you going to do about it?
Right.
You can't do anything about it unless you first strengthen yourself.
Right.
Once you've strengthened yourself, all of this is a trifling then at that point. It's trifling nonsense for you. You can jump over it, kick it in the shin, get it to move, whatever you want. But the first order of business is to strengthen yourself. And that self-reflection, value of action, and this notion of accepting, understanding the tools that now exist in the modern day that allow you to do better than what was done in the past. These are things I think that are very important for our youth.
Thank you very much, Amir.
Thank you very much, Jehan Ara.